Okay. Okay, before I start, I just want to say that afterwards we'll have time for discussion, but not quite as long as usual. Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Hasidut. We are continuing our series on the life and teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Before we go into the class itself, I just want to give you a glimpse of what the next few weeks will be like. This week and next week is one component. We're going to be doing a review of the main pillars of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. We have been learning together for approximately 5 months in this series, and I felt it's time that we do a review and make sure we're all on the same page as to understanding the innovations and the importance of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. That we're going to do this week and next week. And then hopefully we are going to go into one of the most important books about the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. It's called Keter Shem Tov, where his actual teachings are recorded. And then to end the series, whenever that's going to be, we're going to go back into the life of the Baal Shem Tov. The first maybe 2 classes is mostly about his life, but there's so much that we didn't deal with or delve into. And so when it comes time to conclude this series, we're going to go into many of the stories of the Baal Shem Tov and how he lived and his students and his whole mission and the Hasidic movement and everything like that. So for tonight, for those who heard the music in the beginning, I mentioned that the one singing, his name is Micha Hyman, and I go way back with Micha when he was a student at Ben Gurion University, and I would go there once a month and do pizza and learning, and we established a beautiful relationship. His wife-to-be was in the same program. They got married. I was privileged to do the ceremony at their wedding. And just a month ago, we went to their daughter's wedding. So it was like full circle. So the reason I'm mentioning him is because he just published a book called Sefer Sharei HaBaal Shem Tov. It's only in Hebrew, and it's really an excellent, excellent book. And what he did is he chose what he felt were like the 18 most important all-around teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, and he wrote a chapter on each one with the actual teachings of the Baal Shem Tov or accounts from his students. But in the beginning, he does what's called a tamtzit, a condensed version of all of these 18. So my intention is to do 9 tonight, and next week another 9. Some of these we've mentioned already. Some of these we just skimmed over. Others we delved pretty deeply into. But nonetheless, 5 months into this course, I felt it was time that we go back and review. So I'm going to go by the 18 chapters that he set up here. And as I said, it's really an excellent book. Right now, it's only available in Hebrew. So he begins by saying Avodat Hashem b'ni'imut u'metikut, that the Baal Shem taught that the teachings of the Torah, what's called the avoda, the lifestyle of the Torah, needs to be sweet and full of joy. Now that it sounds like obvious, but this was a big innovation of the Baal Shem Tov. Now, David HaMelech already wrote, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, bo lefanav birnana, serve God with joy, come before him with song, with happiness. So it's not like the Baal Shem Tov inaugurated this idea of you should be joyous. But as we have spoken about, when the Baal Shem Tov came on the scene, Jewish life was extremely difficult, dangerous. It was really difficult. It just people were having such a hard time just putting food on their table, and just all the massacres and pogroms and decrees. It made life very challenging. So when the Baal Shem came and said the Torah has to be sweet and it has to be full of joy. And here he says that this is not only like very, very illuminated spiritual people that we're talking about. His message was that everyone, doesn't matter what level you're on, if you're connected to God, connected to Torah, then it can be full of joy and full of sweetness. But then he points out, we mentioned this, and it's worth mentioning again, that at the time of the Baal Shem Tov, it was a very common practice to fast and to deny the body. And there was a whole thing of rolling in the snow, fasting from Shabbos to Shabbos, giving one lashes, even though it was symbolic, but it was like heavy. And that was considered, if you want to be holy, and you want to control your urges, and you want to have your spiritual being overrule your physical material body, then you needed to do these afflictions of the body. The Baal Shem Tov was very, very against this. And he took a very strong stand and said that even though for certain people at certain times, these practices may work and may be important, but for the vast majority of people, it's too bitter. It leaves a bitter taste in one's mouth. And he was promoting the idea of serving God with joy. And of course, it wasn't just a teaching. That's how the Baal Shem Tov lived his life. He was a living example of being in joy. So then he says, "Ukesheyesh le'adam shalosh ahavot ikariot." If a person has three main loves in their life that they're focused on, that they do their best to embody, Shehen Ahavat Hashem, Ahavat Yisrael, and Ahavat Torah, the love of God, the love of Israel, and the love of Torah. Rav Ginsburg later adds a fourth essential love, the love of Eretz Yisrael. Now we know that the Baal Shem Tov tried to come to Eretz Yisrael because of his understanding the great importance of Eretz Yisrael. Amar Baal Shem Tov, shehu lo tzarich sigufim. So if a person has these three loves, and they are the basis of his life, love of God, love of Torah, love of Israel, then he doesn't need to afflict his body. He can do it he can connect to God through sweetness and through joy. So that's the first pillar of the Baal Shem Tov. These are not necessarily in a hierarchy or of importance. Just in this book, that was the first one, but there's no doubt that this was, at the time, it was a watershed in Jewish thought. The idea that despite all of the harshness of Jewish life, that we can do it with joy, that the joy can break through all boundaries, all limitations. Simcha poretz geder. There's actually a phrase that simcha breaks through all borders, all obstacles. Okay, so that was our first idea. The next one, we have not gone into that much, and that is lechiyot im hashkachat Hashem, to live with the awareness of divine providence. Hashkacha pratit, divine providence, and to live in that context. So the first idea here is there's no such thing as a chance, or a chance encounter, or a chance experience, or luck, or it just happened that way. The Baal Shem Tov was very, very strong. And he says, Kol ma shekoreh ba'olam, ad leprat hachikatan, everything that happens in the world up to the smallest detail, the tanua, and every movement, hachikatana, even the smallest movement, hu behashgacha pratit shel Hashem yitbarach lahashlim et hakavanah ha'elyona shel habriya kula. This next part is very important. It's not just as divine providence for that person at that moment. That providence is in a bigger context, that the Baal Shem taught that God has a plan. God has providence and is trying to move the world and each individual detail towards this goal. And that's how divine providence plays itself out. And so I want to mention that Rav Micha goes into this, and even one's thoughts are somehow directed by God. And the famous story, I don't think I told this yet, but this famous story is that the Baal Shem Tov was out in nature with his students, and they were sitting in a circle, and one of the students asked the Baal Shem Tov about his teachings about divine providence. And the Baal Shem Tov was quiet. He didn't answer him. And he was sitting there somewhat in a meditative state. And then he looked up. And so naturally, everyone why is he looking up? They look up and they see a leaf was broken off from a branch, and it was like twirling down in the wind. And they see that the Baal Shem Tov is watching this leaf until it landed in the middle of the circle. And then the Baal Shem Tov is staring intensely at this leaf. And they all see at that time I believe it was a worm came and is crawling closer and closer to the leaf and starts to chew the leaf. And the Baal Shem is watching the whole time, and everyone, of course, is watching as well. And then the Baal Shem Tov simply said, that is hashgacha pratit. That is divine providence. Because he taught every detail down to every atom is part of God's providence. Now, I have to mention here that this teaching of the Baal Shem Tov had tremendous effect and influence on Jewish thought. And without going into it deeply, is every Jewish commentator or philosopher or writer over the ages prescribes the idea of divine providence. But truthfully, there are many, many different ideas of how encompassing divine providence is, how it is activated, how it works. And then, of course, the major question is, how does divine providence and omniscience, meaning that God knows the future before it happens, how does that dovetail with free will? This is, of course, the paradox of paradoxes, which we're not going to go into now. But the more you believe that every detail of every action, thought, speech, action of oneself and everyone else is all ultimately either controlled by, influenced by, directed by, moved by God, then the bigger the question is, well, where does free will fit into? So without going into that, that's a whole subject in itself. It's important to know that the Baal Shem Tov was a very, very firm believer that everything that happens is for a reason, and that reason is connected to God's will and providence. So one of the points that is made here, and this is a super important idea that I believe we have mentioned, is, well, first of all, a new thought, which I don't think we talked about. At the end of the book of Bamidbar, Parshat Maseh, it lists 42 journeys that Israel took in the desert. And there's an enormous amount of commentary, and the names of each of the places is given, and they camped in this place, and then they went to that place, and they camped there, and then they went here and there. 42 different journeys. The number 42 is a very, very important number in Kabbalah. But the Baal Shem Tov made a statement, and this goes along with his basic understanding of the whole Torah, is that everything in the Torah applies and is relevant to each person in each generation. And this is even especially all of the mitzvot that we don't do right now, because we don't have a temple, we don't have Kohanim doing the service, and we don't have a Sanhedrin, and we don't have a majority of the Jews living in Israel. All of these affect actually the vast majority of mitzvah, which we don't technically do today. And so then the question is, so why are we learning about it? And the Baal Shem simply says, he's not the only one, but he made a tremendous emphasis that whether we do a particular mitzvah or not, the teachings of the mitzvah are eternal, and they apply to each and every person. So he said these 42 journeys, this is not just Israel in the desert, the 42 journeys during the 40 years in the desert. Every person goes through symbolically 42 journeys in their life. And actually, the names of these places and the order in which they're given are full of hints and allusions to the soul's journey through this world. Again, we're not going to go back into that right now, but that is connected to the idea of hashgacha, is that everyone has these 42 journeys, and these 42 journeys are established or in the context of each person's mission in the world. They're the meaning of their very lives. And so the Baal Shem Tov says that all of this is in the rubric of divine providence. And then he points out the idea, this is almost especially true when it seems that God is hiding his face. We know in the Torah, God says, if Israel turns their back on me and accept other gods and don't follow the Torah, that I will hide my face. So this represents that many people feel at different times in their life that like God's face is hidden. And the Baal Shem Tov points out is that it's almost especially during those times where we have to understand that there's something we need to learn here. There's some teaching, some challenge, some test that it's important that we go through. And of course, when it's happening, sometimes it's very hard to see why we or other people need to be suffering. These are some of the most existential, philosophical questions that we have in life. But here he's saying, says like this, if that a person receives with love and with understanding that ultimately some good will come out of this, through that he connects to God in a way that can help sweeten the judgments of the moment. And I'm just going to mention, because we want to make this relevant, I'm sure people who have been following the news, and it's more than heartbreaking, because virtually every day numbers of soldiers are dying in Lebanon and in Gaza, and most of them are young. Most of them are married with lots of children, and it's just heartbreaking. But sometimes on the news they will video some of the speeches at the funerals, and the kind of faith that people have at the very moment that they're burying their loved ones it's heartbreaking, but incredibly inspiring at the same time. And that's really what the Baal Shem is saying here, that God's divine providence is not just when things are going well for us. And we have to understand that it's happening all the time. And one other the point we want to make here is a major teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. And again, like I said, some of the things we went over, but it could have been months ago, and it's really important to review these things. Is the Baal Shem Tov taught very strongly, And he applied it to himself. If you are having a problem with another person, or your chemistry with another person is not very good, or even if you see someone doing something wrong, the Baal Shem Tov said that you wouldn't be seeing this if there's not a little part of you that is somewhat a part of this bad chemistry or wrongdoing, that when whatever you see is like a message. That's how the Baal Shem Tov understood divine providence. It's not like we go through life and things happen and like it doesn't matter so much. The Baal Shem took everything personally. And the story that I remember is the Baal Shem Tov was walking home from shul Friday night, very happy and inspired. And as he's walking on the corner, he sees two Jews like fighting with each other and yelling at each other and saying terrible things. And the first thing the Baal Shem thinks is, what did I do that I deserve to see this on Shabbos? Like, what is it about me? So in other words, the Baal Shem Tov personalized every experience. And he felt that if there wasn't something that he had to learn by it, or fix, or rectify, or refine, he wouldn't be seeing it. So this is a very, very high level of consciousness. And I think everyone knows, though, that there are times where these things are clear to us, that sometimes it's like we don't know why we're seeing certain things or experiencing certain things, but sometimes we do. And sometimes it's very clear what the message is. Now, of course, each one of these has a lot more. My purpose tonight is to do a quick review. The next one is Kavanah Achat Lasot Nachat Ruach Lashem. That a person should have but one intent, and that is to give joy and pleasure to God. This is a major idea in what's called Avodat Hashem, is that a person should always be thinking, are my actions right now, my thoughts, my speech, is this pleasing to God? Is this what makes God happy with his creation? Is this what brings me closer to God? But here the emphasis is giving pleasure to God. And in Hebrew, it's nachat. In Yiddish, it's nachas. Nachas means like spiritual satisfaction. And the Baal Shem taught that this should be top in our consciousness, that to serve God means like a child wants to please their parent, wants their parent to be proud of them. And we are God's children. And so the idea is to give joy and pleasure to God. So it's a simple idea. Of course, we can go into it much deeper, but this is it's a bit of a chiddush, like a new kind of idea how to live our lives. Is this giving God pleasure right now? Our prayers, our deeds, our mitzvot, our mundane lives, are we doing it with God in mind to make him have nachas from us, That's why in Yiddish, like the big blessing to give parents is to have nachas from your children. To have nachas from your children. But here, it's the opposite. We're the children who want to please their parents, or in a relationship where a husband wants to give pleasure and satisfaction and joy to his wife, and vice versa. Okay, the next one is Ha'adam tzarich la'amin b'chashivut avodato. This also is just a major idea and a paradigm shift. And I believe we learned something similar in a different context. I think it was one of our last pathways through the orchard, where the Baal Shem Tov said that sometimes humbleness is not a good trait. And we know that humbleness is one of the greatest traits, and that arrogance and overblown pride is very looked down upon. So here, though, the Baal Shem Tov says that sometimes humbleness is not so positive. In what cases is he talking about? So he's talking about when one looks at their own actions and their own purpose in the world and their own mission. If a person is too humble, they might come to think, what difference does it do so much? Whatever I think, I say, I do. Yes, I want to do good. I want to be close to people and this and that. But my actions, there's 8 billion people on the earth, and the earth is this little speck in the Milky Way, and the Milky Way is like even a tinier speck in the whole cosmos. Is what I do really that important? And the Baal Shem says, you better believe it. And that's why you in this case, humbleness is not advocated. And so this is an important, and so listen what he says here. He says, "Hayetzer hara menaseh lahastir me'adam kama chashuva v'chaviva avodato lifnei Hashem." That one's evil inclination tests a person by trying to hide. Now, I'll take it back. That the evil inclination tries to hide from a person how important and precious their service is before God. And how much pleasure and satisfaction that God gets from our serving him. And so he continues, and he says like this. He says that it's like the ladder in Yaakov's dream, where it was firmly established in the earth, but its head reached the heavens. It says, and angels are jealous of human beings because of the merit that we have, that God has given us to be so close to him. And he goes on to say is that our actions affect not just this world, but all the upper worlds as well. This is a major concept in Kabbalah and Chassidut, an extremely important one. Because many people like, okay, I do important things and it's worthy of my time and effort, but we don't always feel that every action of ours can make a difference in the world. If you remember the Rambam, who was the epitome of logic, said one should look at the whole world as if it's perfectly balanced between good and not good, and that my next action can actually tip the balance. This is from the Rambam. So for him, it's not like a mystical idea. He sees it as a reality, is that everything matters. It's just that most of the time we don't see the results. We don't see the effects of our thoughts, speech, and action. So listen what he says here. He says, Aliyah utefila shelo, afilo hachi ketana bokat reki'im umashpia al kol ha'olamot b'chaviva be'ahuva ma'od etzel Hashem yiparach. That a person, when they're involved with an elevated consciousness or in prayer, and even the smallest experience or attempt to do something positive. So the Baal Shem says it breaks open the firmaments, the heavens, and has an effect on all of the worlds. And it is precious and beloved by God. So again, this is a very high, elevated type of consciousness that we're talking about. To always have in mind giving God pleasure, to always have in mind the earth-shattering consequences of our thoughts, speech, and action. It's not an easy level to live on, but even if we integrate it a little bit, it can have such a difference in how we live our lives. The next one, and we're going to go a little bit quicker here, so I want to do this all in 2 weeks. Godel Ahavat Yisrael v'limud zchut. So this is the greatness of the love of Israel and giving people the benefit of the doubt. And so this is one we have talked about. If we remember that the Baal Shem Tov's father on his deathbed told the Baal Shem Tov that he should love every Jew and he should fear nothing but God. And the Baal Shem made it the foundation of his life and the foundation of the Hasidic movement. And here, probably the greatest representatives of this is Chabad, where Chabad has literally spread all over the world with the mission of reaching out and loving every Jew, helping every Jew, no matter where they're holding, no matter how far away they are, of doing everything they can to help and draw them close to Hashem and Torah. And so this is just an obvious one. So here, though, the second part is to give a person the benefit of the doubt. This is also very challenging. We see things that people do, does not find grace in our eyes. It bothers us. It puts us off. But the Baal Shem is teaching. It's not just the Baal Shem Tov. He's just emphasizing that anywhere we can, try to find some good in this person. We might not like the current deed that they're doing, but we don't reject a person. We can reject their actions, but not to reject a person, and always try to find some way to look at the positive in other people. And listen what he says. He says, "Kasher adam ro'eh eze ra b'chavero, lo yishpot oto ela yargish et tzaro v'yitpalel alav v'yazer lo." So he says that when a person sees something like really off in his friend, or it could be a stranger also, he should not judge him harshly. Rather, he should try to feel what is going wrong in this person's life that they're acting like this, and pray for them and try to help them. So here again, this is just such a beautiful way. And it's, of course, it's challenging for every person, because human beings have a tendency to judge very quickly. And it takes a lot of spiritual work to prevent ourselves from doing that. A lot of spiritual work. But that's what the Baal Shem Tov is advising. The next one we're just going to mention, and that is Avodat Hashem B'Simcha. It's very connected to the first one, where we have to live our Torah that it's sweet, and it's really connectable. What makes our living the Torah sweet? And here is the answer: is joy. Joy is what can sweeten any judgment. And so the Baal Shem was a living example, especially in prayer and when teaching. And so the Hasidim, the early Hasidim, they put so much energy into joyful prayer, singing and dancing, at communal meals or meals on Shabbat or on holidays, of turning it into just this incredibly joyous experience. And of course, it had a huge effect on the entire Hasidic movement and Judaism in general. Now, the next one is one that we haven't spoken about that much. I'll mention it here and go into it in a little bit, and that is Hakesher im Hatzadik, connecting to a tzaddik, a righteous person. And there's no doubt that the Baal Shem Tov and many people to this day don't like this aspect of the Hasidic movement. But the Baal Shem Tov emphasized the importance of connecting oneself to a tzaddik, and to be near a tzaddik, and to hear their teachings, and to pray with them, and to have meals with them, or serve them, to be close to a tzaddik. And in certain parts of the Jewish people feel that the Hasidic movement has overdone this concept. But I have to mention that it's not a new concept, because going back to the Talmud, the language was different, but it was the idea of being close to your Rebbe, who is a Talmid Chacham, who is a scholar. And it says in Pirkei Avot that you should sit at the feet of scholars, and you should drink in their words. So this concept of being close to a tzaddik to be close to, in the old days, to a prophet, to be close to the judges. This is not a new concept, but the Baal Shem Tov took this idea, and in many parts of the Hasidic movement, you have a whole group of people connected to the Rebbe. And like I said, some people feel that too much emphasis is put on the connection to the tzaddik. Nonetheless, as I mentioned, throughout Jewish history, there is this idea of connecting to a Rebbe, what's called a mashpia, someone who can influence you for the good, a rebbitzin, a scholar. It's an important idea, but there's no doubt that the Baal Shem Tov put a special emphasis that by being connected to the tzaddik can help one inspire and put people on the right track. But as I mentioned, there is a certain danger of being so connected to the tzaddik that they become like an intermediary. And that, of course, is not acceptable in Judaism. So there is a certain danger here, but the Baal Shem Tov is just emphasizing how much a person can be inspired, can benefit, can be uplifted, can be assisted through connection with holy people. And there's no doubt it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true that being connected to holy people can have a profound effect on one's life without one giving up their independence. And that's what the Baal Shem wanted. He wanted everyone to stand on their own 2 feet. But if there is a tzaddik, a rebbe, a mashpia, so don't be the opposite. Like in the Western world, it's like every person wants their independence, and no one can influence me. I make my own decisions. I do my own thing. I'm the king of my castle. So that's like the opposite. But there's no doubt that in Judaism that we look for holy people, teachers, rabbis, rebbitzins, rebbes, tzaddikim, to be connected to because we benefit from it. And the next one is Tachlit HaKol HaDveikut. What's the ultimate purpose of all service of God? What's called Dveikut is clinging to God. In the ultimate sense, is becoming one with God. Is having such a God consciousness that for a moment or much longer, we can hardly make the differentiation between ourselves and God. And this is an experience that in many instances comes through prayer, meditation, deep connection to music, deep connection to being in nature, where one transcends their normative egotistic consciousness or ego-centered consciousness and unifies, clings. That's what Dveikut means, to cling, to be one with. In modern Hebrew, glue is devek. to be glued to something is like together, one, unified. And so the Baal Shem Tov is saying that is the ultimate purpose of all service of God, is to actually cling to God, to be one with God. And one of the most important influences in the world of learning today is from the Slonim Rebbe in his classic book, Netivot Shalom. And he mentions many times in his book this concept that the purpose of everything is this concept called dveikut. And the last one that we will do tonight is, of course, something that we mentioned over 4 to 6 weeks. If you remember, we did what's called Amuda Tefillah. We learned the pillar of prayer, the Baal Shem Tov's teachings about prayer. And so the last major foundational pillar of Chassidut is the idea of ta'anug ha'tefillah, of the spiritual opportunity of prayer. And as we mentioned many times, the idea that the Baal Shem was trying to teach was to take prayer out of, I wouldn't say simply, but being an obligation. And as I've mentioned many times, looking at prayer as an obligation is also a very important concept. Very important concept to see it as an obligation. But far too many people see it only as an obligation and therefore rush through it, don't get very much spiritual nourishment from prayer, but are satisfied that they've fulfilled their requirement to pray morning, afternoon, and evening. They did it. But the Baal Shem was like a whole revolution in how to approach prayer as this incredible spiritual opportunity. So that's where we're going to end tonight. We went through actually 9 different pillars. I'm going to go over them quickly again. The idea of that the service of God should be pleasurable and sweet, that understanding and living with the idea of God's divine providence in every detail of existence, kavanah, the intention that my actions, my speech, my thoughts should give pleasure to God, should give satisfaction to God, to make God happy, as it were. The next one was how much we have to believe in the importance of what we do in this world. This is like such an important thing, because so many people don't really feel their lives are that meaningful. They like, yeah, I do this, I do that, and I help where I can, but I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing here. I better get as much physical pleasure as I can, and that's it. But here, the idea is to really understand the importance of everything that we do. Then we just very briefly, the idea of the love of Israel and giving the benefit of doubt to others, serving God with joy, being connected to a tzaddik. The purpose of everything is to cling to God, to unify with God, and to learn how to turn prayer into not just a obligation, but a incredible spiritual opportunity, including to giving pleasure to God. So may we all be blessed to integrate these teachings and really make them a real part of our lives.